Hello and welcome to the Movie Paradise. I am your host, Nathanael Molnár, and this is our Black Panther spoiler discussion. This whole thing will be spoilers, so if you have not seen the movie yet, watch something else. Go on the site, check out our spoiler-free review of the film, because this is all spoilers. We're talking everything Black Panther. And I'm very honored to have a panel with me today. On my left, we have Connor Murphy.
Hello.
Over here on my right, we have Nick Elliott.
Hello.
And then over there, we have Matt Smith.
Hello.
So, let's just take a second to go around the panel here and just say overall what our very basic thoughts were on the movie. I really liked it a lot. Personally, I know a lot of people have said that it's in my top 5 MCU movies. I wouldn't say it's necessarily there for me. I'd say it's definitely in the top 10. Not exactly my top 5. I love all the character work done with Black Panther, with Killmonger. Excellent performances, great action and choreography. Really liked what it had to say as a film. And in that sense, it's a very unique Marvel movie, because not a lot of Marvel movies do that. So overall, I was just very pleasantly... I guess you can't really say surprised, because we were expecting this to be good. But I went into it a little bit apprehensive, just because personally, I know not everyone shares this sentiment, but I was not a huge fan of Thor Ragnarok. So I went in just a little bit apprehensive, but Black Panther it did it for me, and it was a great movie, and I very much enjoyed watching this film. Nick?
I think I'm the person you started talking about, because I think this movie is in my top 5. I think what you said, it's unique enough to set it apart, where a lot of the other movies, their themes kind of roll together. I think this movie was unique enough to set it apart for me. I think like you said, the performances were fantastic. The message behind it was great. The choreography, I really liked the costume and set design. That was fantastic. And just overall, I loved what this movie did for really the genre as a whole. Like, I believe I spoke to you about this earlier. Like, if you had done this movie in the 90s, it would not have done as well as it was.
Well, funny enough, Wesley Snipes was trying to get this made in 1992. He was trying to do a Black Panther movie.
It's not only because of, like, the improvements to, like, camera technology and the CGI. Like, I think we're at a point now where a movie like this is needed, and I think it delivered a lot on the message that it put out there for everyone. The whole thing about, like, representation in film and all that stuff. Wonder Woman was pretty similar to me, though I think this is by and far a better movie. But I loved it. I loved the film. I thought what it did was important, and that it did it really well, I think.
Yeah. Connor?
So I guess I have a different approach in a way. Like, I am not a Marvel person in the same way that you two are. I have generally not disliked necessarily, but I have generally not been a fan of the franchise and the Marvel Cinematic Universe, really because of the universe itself, because of every movie needing to be connected. That's been a huge, issue with it that I've had. I'll try not to go into the overall issues I have too much in this discussion, but this movie, I liked it a lot. I felt like it worked very well standalone. As somebody who hasn't seen a new Marvel movie in a very long time, probably 2 years, except for Logan, which I did see recently, and that was another good standalone. But I did enjoy it very much. I thought it had strong themes throughout it, asked a lot of questions. It felt a lot more like a comic book, and I appreciated that a lot. And I know that's something that you guys don't necessarily understand or agree on, so...
Well, it's not that... I wouldn't say that I don't understand or agree with it. I just don't think that's something I look for in a comic book movie, because for me, I'm looking for more of an adaptation rather than seeing a comic book actually come to life on screen. It's more about the characters coming to life rather than a comic book itself coming to life.
I think you really can see a lot of elements in comic books, from the comic books in the movies, though. Like, I think it is something that is, like, sort of underlying there in almost all of the... Or in, like, a good amount of the movies in the MCU.
Yeah, well, like we've been talked about before, Civil War, the airport scene is like the 2-page spread in a comic book. You do have certain elements, but I don't need a comic book movie to literally be like, oh, we're going to have this frame, or this comic book panel, and then this panel, and this panel, and, you know, I'll need it to be stylized to the point where I feel like I'm reading a comic book, or watching a comic book, rather.
And I think that just comes down to personal taste.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone has their own levels of...
For me, though, this felt perfectly stylized to that point, where it was more comic booky than other movies I've seen, and I haven't seen Civil War, so...
Yeah.
But this felt like it achieved that which I have had an issue with in other movies, so...
Matt, what were your overall thoughts?
Like, as much as this movie, like, I felt, like, emotionally, like, how, like, impactful it was when I was watching it, and I was, like, so blown away. I think I would, like, be able to say it's, like, my favorite movie in the MCU. Now, maybe you could talk me out of it, or maybe if I watched all of them again, I'd be like, okay, maybe it's up there, not number one. But I think in terms of just, like, first impressions, this was, like, absolutely blew me away more than every other Marvel movie. And I didn't think I was going to get as much out of it as I did.
So let's jump right into it. What are some of the things about this film that we really liked?
Like I said before, this movie felt different, and I really enjoyed that. I think, for me, a lot of the movies in Phase 2 kind of felt a bit similar, like kind of tended to blend together. There were obviously standout movies in every phase, but I think Marvel has kind of a formula down, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think going into a Marvel movie, I can expect a certain amount of things, and Black Panther kind of surprised me in a way, in a very good way. It was different enough to get me interested in the film. Obviously, I love all the Marvel movies as much as, you know, any other film, but this movie, and like you said, it felt standalone. If Iron Man had flown in 45 minutes into the film and said, hey, it's me, I'm Iron Man, I'm still here, it's still a Marvel movie.
I was like secretly, silently dreading that the whole film.
That
somebody would make an appearance.
Exactly.
It felt as standalone as as the 20th? However many movies?
I think this is like 18 or something.
18th, so it felt as standalone as the 18th movie in a universe can, and I really enjoyed that. That was one of the things that I wanted out of this film, and I liked that a lot.
Could you define Phase 2? I know I might be the only one here, but...
basically, all the Marvel movies, like Avengers and before, was Phase 1. That was kind of like setting up, like, we have all these characters, and then here are the Avengers. This is what we've been building to. Phase 2 was introducing a few more characters and tying up the stories from Phase 1. Those 3 initial characters, like Captain America, Thor, and Iron Man, they all had their arcs started, I guess you could say. Phase 2 was kind of like tying those up, kind of furthering those arcs. And
ends at Infinity War, I assume?
No, Phase 2 ended at Ant-Man.
Yeah, Ant-Man was the last one.
So, like, that phase was all about introducing a few new characters, but kind of furthering those storylines. And I think Age of Ultron's a good place to put the end of that, like, thematic arc. Like, Ant-Man didn't really do too much to continue that. But Phase 3 started with Doctor Strange.
No, Civil War.
Civil War.
Yes.
Civil War, okay. And if I'm not mistaken, we are still in Phase 3.
Yes.
Phase 3 is about ending those first 3 heroes' kind of journeys with Infinity War.
All the heroes' first films, like the main heroes, Iron Man, Captain America, everyone's first film, Avengers. Everyone's second film, Avengers 2. Everyone's third film, Infinity War. Minus Iron Man, of course, because he had like a sequel right away. And then you have everyone's new movies integrated within the phases. So it's just a way to mark off, like, basically in between when each Avengers movie happens. So
the Avengers movies are like the tie-in where it all comes together.
Yeah, essentially.
Yeah. So, like, you have them all on their separate path, and then they come together, and then they break away, and then they come together, and they break away like that.
Okay. That makes sense.
So,
going off of what you were saying about how this is very standalone, and how that works for it, as much as I love Spider-Man Homecoming,
Yeah.
one of my problems with that is that you can't just watch Spider-Man Homecoming as its own thing.
Mm-hmm.
You have to watch 6 other films in order to fully understand Spider-Man Homecoming.
Yeah.
With Black Panther, yes, it definitely helps to have seen Civil War, but one of the things, like you were saying, it does really well is that everything that happens in Civil War, it pretty much explains within Black Panther. And you may appreciate it a little bit more having seen Civil War, but you don't need to see Civil War.
I certainly didn't feel like I was missing out at all by having not seen Civil War. It felt like...
I mean, it just like expands upon his relationship with his father, the death of his father, and just his interactions with some of the other Avengers. That's really all it gets into is Civil War.
Matt, any particulars?
On that topic, or just something new? Right. Okay. So something I really liked about was how unlike not any other movie, but I really cared about people that didn't have superpowers.
Mm-hmm.
I cared a lot for the general. I cared a lot for his sister, and just like even the people, even though they came and sort of fought at the end, I was really happy that I could be like, I love this character, and they're not on the title. They're not the title, or they're not the main villain. Even though I loved Black Panther and Killmonger, I thought it was just awesome to have, like, instead of like 1 or 2 people I really liked, I had like 5 or so characters that I really got into.
Cool.
And that ties back into the idea that this movie had such a phenomenal cast.
Oh
yes.
Every character was important to the story, meant something. Everyone could take something they enjoyed out of any particular character. So,
and I think one of the film's strengths, building off of what you were saying, Matt, was that there is a period of time within the film where Black Panther goes away. And the weight of the movie falls on the supporting cast.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can sink a film. If you don't have strong enough supporting characters or strong enough actors in those roles, that can sink a movie. And it will make everything, like, the pace will just die, come to a stop, and you're just waiting for the character to come back.
Yeah.
But that doesn't happen with this movie because of how strong those supporting characters are.
Yeah, I found myself, like, when he was, like, he revealed that they had found him at the bottom of in the water.
Mm-hmm.
When they were just like, yeah, we have him, I realized when I was watching, I wasn't even, like, thinking about, like, where he was or how he was going to come back. Like, thinking back, like, oh, that's kind of obvious.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, I should have saw that coming, and I didn't. And it wasn't because I was just blanking on it. It's because I was so enthralled with characters that weren't the main, and they were doing such a good job. I felt like I was, okay, he's gone, now let's focus on these guys. And it's like, you didn't even realize that he was gone until they're like, oh, we have him, by the way.
Yeah, usually Marvel will have, like, a couple good, really side characters, but I thought this film has probably the best ensemble. Like, you could say, oh, well, Avengers has the best ensemble. Well, that's because you have all these main characters coming together. Whereas this is the best ensemble of you have your main characters, secondary characters, 3rd tier, 4th tier, but they're all really well developed and they have clear motivations. Yeah. You have Oscar nominee Daniel Kaluuya playing a very important character, even though his character is really the 4th most important character, 5th most important character in the whole movie, and yet you have someone of his caliber in there.
And even to that, there were a lot of parts of the movie, it felt like there were scenes devoted to fleshing out characters and furthering their arcs without it being like, now we're going to give this person a lead in this scene. It was like, now here, see a scene where he walks in and he says, I'm upset with you, Black Panther, for not killing Claw. Bringing Claw back here. You failed, and I thought you were going to do it.
A lesser filmmaker would have overridden that.
Yeah.
Overridden that, yeah. And going back to what Nick was saying a little bit before about how this kind of breaks from the formula of Marvel. One thing, as much as I love MCU films, their big things that they go to is the action and the comedy. Yeah. And this film really... it has its action scenes. They're great. Yeah. But it doesn't have that many. It has probably 3 or 4. Yeah. The comedy, not much comedy in this. What makes Black Panther really work, from where I was looking at it, was the emphasis put on character and narrative. It was all about building up these characters and driving them forward, and building up this narrative and driving that forward instead of having the reliance be on the action and the comedy.
Definitely.
And this especially stands out in terms of some of the other MCU movies that maybe, like, I liked Age of Ultron, but that seemed like it was there to sell those action pieces. Like, everything in between was kind of like, all right, we're building up to the action, here it is, this is what you came to see. But with Black Panther, it's so story-driven and so character-driven that the action scenes kind of seem like
an added
something
bonus.
Thrown in there, like, this is cool, look at this, but also, like, yeah, that movies like, I guess, like Thor: The Dark World, like those big like action scenes that everyone kind of likes to see, but other than that, there's not too much there. But Black Panther had, I think, probably a perfect balance. I am super, like, I like action movies. That's why I go to see superhero movies. They look cool. But Black Panther, I think, struck the perfect balance of having enough character motivation, having enough story-driven elements, and supplementing that with action to kind of prove its point.
Yeah.
Let's talk about those action sequences, because even though it didn't have a ton of them, the ones that we did get were really good. Mainly that car chase sequence with Claw and everything, that was fantastic.
That was really good. I enjoyed that a lot.
It was, and you're a person who, you don't really get into action as much as most people.
I enjoy action movies to an extent, but I'm always more focused on the drama of things. Usually people like group action and comedy into a similar boat and say, like, these aren't dramatic movies, these are just have fun movies. But I find that action movies aren't quite as, they lack more substance than like comedy lacks. But when done well, I do enjoy good action sequences in movies, and I feel like Nick said, this is the perfect balance of drama and action.
As long as the action has a narrative purpose for being there.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, and especially that car chase sequence, you felt that Claw was this terrorist that had been evading Wakandan justice for decades. And it was the one loose tie that his father had never been able to fix. He had never been able to catch this one guy. And he had to prove it to his friend, played by Daniel Kaluuya. He had to do all these things. And this was, in many respects, this was his way of proving that he had the right to be king. That this was him coming into his own. And he failed. And that there were big ramifications for that.
Yeah.
And so you have all these narrative reasons and character reasons, all these stakes added to that one sequence.
Definitely.
And while it's very well shot, very well choreographed, great special effects, the fact that there's such strong reasoning behind why it's in there and what the ramifications of that action sequence are make it even more powerful.
Yeah.
Especially when you get to the very end, which I love the car chase sequence, but I think I might even like that ending battle more. Just because you have this very, like, all the different parts of Wakanda, the different types of people coming together, and they're all fighting it out. And it's just it felt like a very Game of Thrones kind of coming together, like a collision of all these different kinds of people, like, fighting it out over the throne of Wakanda. It was just a very, very interesting battle, and I thought it was very well done. And I didn't know how I would like the rhinos at first. I actually really came to like them. How they were used. Like, at first I was like, oh, that's a rhino.
One of the interesting things, and I think this ties back into your love of comic book movies being stylized, when Black Panther, like, single-handedly takes down a rhino, that is ripped straight from a comic book. I'm forgetting the exact issue, but it's ripped entirely from an issue of Black Panther.
Yeah.
And that's what I really like to see. I think that's my favorite aspect of comic book movies being comic booky, when, like, there's a certain panel or a certain snippet of dialogue that's very iconic from the comics, that's lasted that long. When you slip that in there as a nod, like, this isn't the exact circumstance in which it happens, but we've done our research. We read these comics. We know this is something that everyone looks as a defining moment. I like it when that's slipped in there. Yeah. So I really appreciate the rhino scene for that.
It's really sort of a love letter to the really hardcore fans. Like, we put that in there for you.
Exactly. Exactly.
That people will really get something from that.
And if you'll indulge me, I'd like to talk about the choreography for the fight.
Yes.
Specifically, the two fights on the waterfall. I think those for me were the strongest fight scenes, and the reason for that is a lot of there's a lot of what I call movie fighting, which is it draws influence from a bunch of different Western martial arts, but this movie specifically drew from African martial arts, which I really enjoyed, and I also liked how each character's fighting style was very tailored to them. Killmonger, as we know, has a military background, U.S. military. He was in Afghanistan. He was in Iraq, I believe. So I could see in his fighting style a blend of the more traditional African styles, but also U.S. military tactics in the way he fought. And on the opposite side of that, T'Challa is a very traditional kind of fighter. And I really enjoyed that level of detail. It was subtle. Like, I'm a martial arts nerd, so maybe I only picked up on that. But
yeah, that went over my head.
But like it's, I think that is a testament to, this is a movie I think you could watch again and again and notice something. Like, that's one of those things for me that I noticed, that each character's fighting style is sort of tailored to their role. T'Challa is, as the king, now someone who's in a sense the protector of Wakandan culture, even though he's aiming to open up the country and involve himself more in the world. He's still very much that cultural center of Wakanda. And I think his fighting reflected that, where it's not very Western. There's elements of it that are very heavily rooted in his own culture, where someone like Killmonger, who's kind of in conflict with that, a product of those two different worlds, kind of blends together those cultures in the way that he fights. And I really enjoyed that. I think that's probably one of the strongest. Those two scenes, the original one with M'Baku, I believe his name is, was very good to kind of establish T'Challa as a fighter. I'm a king, I'm a diplomat, but I'm also a warrior. And obviously you've seen that in Civil War. But again, like, if you're just starting out with this movie, you kind of get that from the get-go, that this is a guy who, in all aspects, isn't someone you want to mess with. But the waterfall scene with Killmonger and T'Challa, I think, is my favorite fight scene, just because of the levels to it. It's important story-wise, it's important character-wise, all those things. So
I think that is the Killmonger one. That is a very strong one, because when we watched the fight with M'Baku, I remember I was sitting there, I was thinking, because they were each taking the lead in that fight.
Yeah.
Like, M'Baku had a hand over T'Challa, and then T'Challa got a hand over M'Baku.
It's very much like a dance. Like,
yes.
Yeah.
But there was a respect between the two, and that really comes about later in the film.
Yes.
You realize that even though they were fighting over the throne, M'Baku doesn't hate T'Challa.
No.
There's a respect between the two.
Yeah.
But we have that beginning fight between the two. And then it comes back to that waterfall later, and you have Killmonger. And I remember sitting there watching Killmonger fight T'Challa, and I'm thinking, holy shit, how is T'Challa going to beat this guy? Because Killmonger was absolutely ruthless. And I was sitting there, I was like, I don't see a way that T'Challa could beat Killmonger. And he doesn't.
Yeah. No, it was very visceral and almost uncomfortable at times. And I think that was a huge plus to it. Like, this is a very pivotal moment in the story, and it should kind of make you feel something more than just, I'm rooting for the hero. There's that moment of doubt and that moment of panic when Killmonger seemingly kills him, that you're like, what do I do? Like, what now? Like, I give the movie huge credit for that.
And I really liked it when the guy stepped in to try to stop it. You're thinking, this is how he gets out of it, and it's just like, no, you're going over the edge, buddy. It's like, really throw me through a loop there.
One thing, that scene was part of it, but the whole film did a great job of this. It really established him as a king before a superhero.
Yes,
that was one thing that I really appreciated about it. Just like he wasn't like, the end all be all of fighting. Like when in these fight scenes, he did lose sometimes, or he did lose the upper hand. He was never like, I'm a superhero, I win. It was more like, I'm a king who also has to be able to fight. Kind of a thing.
Especially when he took on when he accepted the challenge, that was very much of him being like, I'm putting the rules of my culture over me being a superhero in a super suit. It really showed that.
Yeah, definitely.
Let's talk about Killmonger, because I think Michael B. Jordan as Eric Killmonger is one of the strongest parts of this movie. One thing about MCU. I mean, as much as most people love MCU movies, one of their biggest weaknesses is that they don't do a good job with their villains. You have a couple standouts, but for the most part, they put the focus entirely on the hero, and the villain is just there to kind of help the hero's story go along, to progress the hero's story.
Yeah.
What Black Panther does a really good job of is we get a very well fleshed out villain. He is given so much dimension, so many layers, and he's really, you understand exactly where he's coming from.
Yeah.
And in some respects, you agree with him. Like, I remember when I was watching the fight between Killmonger and T'Challa, Killmonger just annihilates T'Challa and then says, "This is your king, he is the one who's supposed to protect you."
Yeah.
And I just, like, beat his ass.
Yeah.
I was like, you know, he's kind of right. Like, this guy's supposed to be, like, their protector, and he just, like, whipped his ass. Like, there's something about this character that you're watching it, and you're watching him explain his motives and where he's coming from, and who he is as a person, and what has happened in his life to define him. And you're kind of thinking, I understand this guy, and to some degree, I agree with him.
Yeah.
Now, he may not have the right approach to doing what he wants to accomplish, because, you know, his end goal is, through violence, we will take back what is rightfully ours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So his approach is wrong, but his ideology is, like, you can't really dispute it that much.
You almost feel sad because you're like, dude, I agree with you. Like, you
Yeah.
are right, but
You
gotta do it
can't
another
kill
way.
people.
Yeah.
You can't just solve it with violence. But I get what you're saying, and I'm like, I just like
one of the best ways I've ever heard this put is, every great villain truly believes that they are the hero. And I got that from Killmonger.
Absolutely.
I absolutely got that from him. One of the reasons, like, when I think of bad, for lack of a better term, bad MCU villains, I immediately think of Malekith from Thor: The Dark World. He's evil. He's the big evil dark elf guy coming to conquer because
he's evil.
he wants
to. But
nothing to do
with Killmonger, you get his side. You switch to his perspective. That's one thing I liked, that you see his backstory. You see him as a child. You see him interacting with his father. You see elements of this story entirely from his perspective. And I don't think that's often done in MCU movies, or at the very least it's done very well. And I completely agree with what you said, Matt. He's right, but there's something still wrong about it. And
I really found myself the whole film as well. Not the whole film, as I'm sure you'll want to talk about later. But when he was introduced, the whole time I was thinking, I really wish that he would turn around and become a good guy, be able to work with him, or, you know.
Yeah.
But, you know, the fact that I would felt that strongly, I really wish this guy would just, you know, do it the right way.
Yeah.
And you almost had a Martin Luther King, Malcolm X kind of dynamic between them, where they're both fighting for the same thing, and they're both fighting for what they believe is right. It's just one is going for a more peaceful route, and one is going for the more violent route.
Yeah, I can definitely see that.
Yeah.
Any more before we move on to what we didn't like about the film? Does anyone else have any quick thoughts about something else they really liked?
So one thing I really liked was the portrayal of the culture in this film. With a lot of the MCU films, they're very predominantly Western based. They take place in America, Britain, UK, places like that. This movie was, for the most part, almost entirely set in Wakanda. There were scenes in South Korea, I believe.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it was entirely focused on this culture that not a ton of Western audiences might be able to fully relate to. But what I greatly enjoyed was that they did their homework. It wasn't a stereotype. This was this culture. Each of the producers, the writers, they did their homework. They learned what this culture was behind what everyone learns about Africa in high school. I really, really enjoyed the level of detail and attention was paid to this different culture. It was given its respect, and that's one of the things. when I say I'm really glad this movie wasn't made in the 90s or 80s, I don't think that level would have been given to it. I don't think that level of respect and
I don't think we would have had a black director.
I don't think so. Yeah.
Or black writers.
Exactly. So that's one of the things that when I say this movie, in terms of diversity and representation, that's a huge thing for me because comic books for me is about primarily little kids, but really anyone being able to see themselves in a character that is a hero, someone that is more than just a person, just more than their color or socioeconomic status or whatever. And I think this movie did that phenomenally. There are very powerful and strong female characters, people of color, people, white actors. There's such a huge range where everyone, villain or hero, really has their own weight to them. Yeah. And yeah, I could go on and on, but I think the cultural aspect of this movie was handled phenomenally.
And I liked how they took that culture and then they also added like a fantastical element of it. Because the whole point is Wakanda is this nation that is very
Afrofuturism, I believe is the term for it.
Okay.
I believe that. I think that's the correct
term. I've heard that.
So, that's
which I think that blending of it was really cool.
Yes.
And I loved how everyone kept doubting this nation. I think it kind of spoke to I think it was perfectly represented through Ross is the character's name.
Yes.
Martin Freeman. Martin Freeman's character, Ross. In that he was clearly not like an outspokenly racist person, but he just had that little bit of him, like he couldn't grasp the idea that this African nation was anything more than this third world country.
Yeah.
That it was secretly the most technologically advanced nation in the entire world. He couldn't wrap his head around it until he saw it for himself. And I think that kind of more subtle racism is something that this film tackles in a way. In a very interesting, not very outspoken way, but more of a subtle way in of itself.
Yeah. I definitely think, especially with... he was being asked to fathom that there was an entire advanced civilization being hidden from him, before the whole race thing was introduced. But as they got closer, and he was already in the ship, and he was like, "Are you sure that this is that's when I can agree with you."
Yes.
Yeah.
If that scene hadn't happened, I would fight you on that. But
and I mean, story-wise, he knows that Wakanda is this way, and he has to give off that air. He has to protect that anonymity behind it. But like you said, there is that element to him, and I completely agree that there is that little bit of disbelief. He knows Wakanda exists, and he knows that there's more to it than meets the eye, but like you said, he hadn't seen it. So to what level he didn't know, so there is that level of disbelief in there that that character holds. But story-wise and in the universe, that's kind of his job, but also,
And I loved when they had Claw. And they were like, they stole all of Wakanda's vibranium.
Yeah.
Like this little package that was like that big. You're like, oh yeah, we stole all their vibranium.
Yeah.
You're like, no, they're literally, their entire nation is built on a mountain of vibranium. So let's transition then into the negatives of the film. And as much as we really love this movie, there are some problems with it.
Yeah.
I would say, this was something Connor was alluding to, one of the problems that I had was more the story structure of it. In that I felt the entire Michael B. Jordan Killmonger storyline was introduced way too late into the movie. I really liked all the setup work that they did with it, because the whole first half of the film is focused pretty much primarily on developing T'Challa as a character and setting up the world. But I felt like that whole development and setup part of the film went on a little bit too long. I feel like the whole Killmonger storyline should have been introduced more 40 minutes into the movie as opposed to an hour and a half into the movie. Because while the first part of it is really good, it feels kind of directionless. We're building towards something, but we're not really sure what. And then once we're introduced to exactly what it is we've been building to, we go through that whole story and then it's over. I think the movie as a whole would have benefited from having the real story, because that's the true story is Killmonger comes, challenges the throne, takes over. That's the real story of the whole movie.
Yeah.
But that's not introduced until, halfway through the second act into the third act. If that had been introduced a little bit earlier, I think it would have, the film itself wouldn't feel cramped at the very end. It would have felt a little more spaced out.
Yeah. I would argue, though, that you say directionless. I would say it has a direction, and that direction is Claw. I felt like the movie was going to be about him stopping a terrorist. And so I think that might have been, their motivation behind it. They wanted to, start with Claw and then subvert your expectations and say, no, it's actually a Wakandan guy that is the villain.
Yep, I could see that. Well, did you know going in about Michael B. Jordan being involved in the film? And see, that I think that might play a part in it, is that I knew Michael B. Jordan was the villain. I knew Killmonger was the main antagonist. And so I think, even though he has couple little parts in the beginning, he's not fully introduced until well into the movie.
I think also the first part of the movie is, and I think we can all agree that it's meant to set up Wakanda as a place. Mm-hmm. I think in most films you want to establish the place. I feel like it's a very important part. But in this film, especially because Wakanda is a place we've never been before, and it's a place that is very important to the story as a whole. Its feel is very vital to that story. So I would argue that, well, I completely agree that I feel Killmonger should have been introduced and woven into the story earlier. I argue that first initial part is establishing the setting, in essence, as its own character, as this thing that is being vied for later on in the film. That's my take on it, but I completely agree that I think it was a bit slow in the beginning.
I don't think it's necessarily a pace thing. I don't think for me, I didn't think the beginning was necessarily slow. I just didn't feel like there was an overarching narrative pushing the story forward. I felt like it was very focused on T'Challa becoming king. Yeah. But that was all kind of developing T'Challa as a character, more than this is our main story, this is what the whole film is about. You don't really get a sense of what the whole movie is about until like 3/4 of the way through the film.
I would challenge you to look at it as the whole movie is about him becoming king and realizing how he wants to rule. Because I feel like from the get-go, he's already starting to have a little bit of, I have to do things my own way. The way of my father isn't quite right. Yeah. As much as I respected my father, I have a different idea. Mm-hmm. And maybe at the very beginning he doesn't quite have that, but you really feel that building. And I think the whole first act without Killmonger is just to sort of solidify that this movie is about him becoming king, and Killmonger just challenges that, and while challenging that also expands his point of view and makes T'Challa a better king at the end.
Yeah, I can understand that. I agree with that. I just think if you were to tell me what is this film about, you're gonna say Black Panther is a story about T'Challa taking over the throne, and he's challenged by Killmonger for that throne. I feel like that is what the story is about. But that main part of the story isn't introduced until really late in the movie. And I just think that the film as a whole would have benefited if instead of an hour and a half into the movie, that's when the main storyline's introduced, if it was more like 40 minutes. You would have been able to spend more time with Killmonger. And while I think all the work done with Killmonger and all of that is really good, it did feel a tiny bit rushed to me. Like, it felt a little bit like they're like, all right, here's most of our movie. Here's Killmonger. Bam, 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 bam. He's out. We're done. And I think they would have had a little bit more time to breathe if they had introduced it a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
I would say another problem I have with the film, this is a very minor thing, is for the most part, there's not really much comedy in this movie at all. I mean, you have an occasional one line here or there or something. There is, that's the scene I'm talking about. There's one scene in particular where there is a lot of comedy, like like all in a row, and it feels very forced. It felt like, to me, Marvel came in and said, hey, we need a little bit of comedy. Put it right there. And it felt, and I was like watching it, it didn't organically like weave its way through the movie. It didn't feel natural, just kind of felt like, hey, let's have a whole bunch of comedy right here.
Well, yes, I agree, but I argue that it wasn't so much randomly placed as to establish the relationship between T'Challa and Shuri, his younger sister. That kind of, while they're both royalty and he is her king, that she still has playful banter with him. I do agree that some of it is a bit forced and a bit maybe dating. The "what are those" line is well, I'll admit it got a chuckle out of me, but in the fact that like, come on,
it got less of a chuckle and more of a cringe out of me.
Yeah.
Like
the theater we were in, everyone was laughing at that.
Yeah.
I mean, it works because Shuri in herself is very much a character of two worlds. She's very much part of the Wakandan royal family, but she's also adopting the Western culture into herself. That's part of her character, and that makes sense. To me, it felt a little awkward, but like you said, that's a very
a little bit jarring.
That's a very
like,
minor.
We were very much in this like very deep, serious movie, and all of a sudden we have this one scene that has a whole bunch of jokes, and then we're back to this serious, and it just felt a little jarring in terms of the tone. But it is minor.
I didn't have too big of an issue with it. I mean, you go into a Marvel movie and you expect comedy. That's kind of a trope about Marvel. I really enjoyed how the comedy was kept limited. It wasn't the defining feature of this film, and I really don't think it should have been, and it wasn't. So that's great. I was very comfortable with the amount of it. I was very comfortable with the flow and pacing of it. Pretty much just that one line is...
I would say overall, maybe I'm defending it here, but like I appreciate how well, even though there were those moments where you were kind of taken out of it, like the vegetarian line.
See, that didn't bother me.
But like, what I loved about Black Panther was even though they took those jokes, I immediately found myself like wrapped back into the story. I wasn't just like longing to be like, oh, this is a movie waiting for something cool to happen. Almost immediately after that, it was me like, okay, let's get back into the story. And I was like, I completely forgot about that. And I was like, okay, now I'm interested again.
Yeah.
I think I enjoyed.
I think probably the reason why that scene bothered me is because I felt like I was taken out of the movie. Like for not the vegetarian scene, but the scene between Shuri and T'Challa was I felt like for pretty much all the movie I was just engrossed in it. I was just involved in the film, and it was that one scene that I was taken out, and I was like, okay, come on. I mean, I was really into this movie. You're throwing a whole bunch of jokes. They don't really feel like they need to be there. You could probably communicate the same thing without this kind of humor. I understand this is a trademark of Marvel, but this didn't really feel like a Marvel movie necessarily. And, I mean, it definitely does have some Marvel trademarks. Yeah. But it felt like it was very much its own thing. And so once it started trying to incorporate those Marvel trademarks, it felt off. Like, I feel like it would be the same way as if Iron Man flew in and just showed up. That would feel very jarring because, you know, you have this Black Panther movie that's its own thing, and all of a sudden you're reminded that it's part of something larger.
Yeah.
Speaking of Marvel tropes, it's less of an issue with the film than me just being whiny. Marvel has a big habit of killing off their villains, and Killmonger at the end of the film is killed. I think Killmonger was one of the strongest villains, and I wish he had stayed alive.
Yeah.
I know that for the story, that doesn't make sense. It's very fitting that he does die at the end of the movie, and I liked it, but I wish he had stayed alive. I wanted to see more of him.
I feel the same way. Like I share your sentiment in that, and I feel the same way for Claw. That I wish, just selfishly, I wish that they both stayed alive because I thought they were really good villains. Yeah. And I love Michael B. Jordan and I love Andy Serkis. But for the story that they were telling, both characters needed to die. And it would have felt strange if they hadn't died. Yes,
it's just me being whiny. It's me just wanting everything that I personally wanted from this film. I loved Michael B. Jordan in that role. I feel story-wise he needed to die. That was very impactful, and it wrapped up the story very nicely. I just wanted him to stay alive. I wanted more than just Loki to be the only surviving Marvel villain.
Abomination.
That's true. That's true. I will never let that go. Abomination's still out there, Marvel, if you're watching. But
He's got an apartment.
If Marvel's watching, then I can retire.
But it's like,
hey, should I go participate in that? Nah, I'm good. I'm just gonna watch.
But yeah, that's less of an issue in me being whiny. I want him to live, even though he really shouldn't have.
Yeah.
He was a great villain.
I completely share your
sentiment. I wanted to see more
sentiment.
of him, but that's just me.
To address the comedy thing a little bit, I agree and disagree with you. I feel like that scene was important, and I do think it should have been very comedic. I agree that it was taken too far a little bit. It felt a little bit.
There were a couple
forced
jokes too many.
There were a couple jokes that were too, I'm going to say something really loudly and then you're going to laugh and I'm going to give you a second to laugh before I keep going with this.
Yeah.
Like there was a little bit of that. But what bothered me was specifically the two jokes that M'Baku, is that his name?
M'Baku. I believe that's the pronunciation.
The jokes that he made felt...
The vegetarian one?
The vegetarian
and
one.
What was the other one?
And then he interrupted them and he said, "Are you done yet?" Something like that.
Yeah.
Those both felt out of character for him.
The vegetarian one didn't bother me, but I remember "Are you done yet?" That kind of was like, alright.
I didn't like that at all. The vegetarian one was definitely better. It was, a little bit of I'm not just a big evil king in the mountain.
Yeah. And I think the reason why that line didn't bother me because I had a certain perception of M'Baku in the very beginning. I just kind of thought of him as he's this guy who doesn't recognize T'Challa as his king, and he's fighting for the throne as well. And I just assumed he was kind of this villain. And then we get to the end, near the end, and we realize that while he wants the throne for himself, he has this level of respect for T'Challa. Yeah. And so the vegetarian line kind of just added to
just an icebreaker.
Yeah, well, and also added to our understanding of him as a character.
And his likableness.
He's not a full villain. He's not really an antagonist. He's just another character who has a different set of ideologies.
Yeah.
Especially because if you look at it, he was totally in the right. If you look at how their monarchy works, he was totally in the right to challenge him.
Yeah.
So it's
he had every
even though it sort of seemed I'm supposed to not like this guy, it's he's just exercising his right to do that.
And I think him coming back in the rest of the movie made that clear that he wasn't just as another villain in there. Yeah. He wasn't a Shocker villain in Spider-Man Homecoming, which I like the Shocker character in there.
Yeah.
But he wasn't a secondary villain or a third villain in there. He was just more he had a difference of opinion and he was exercising his cultural right.
What's interesting now, I'm not super well versed in the lore of Black Panther comic books. I believe M'Baku in the comics is a villain.
Yeah.
I believe Man-Ape or something. They didn't call him that in the film.
Yeah.
For pretty obvious reasons, but I like the idea that in the comics, what could be just kind of a villain was turned into this character that was more that. While yes, opposed to our main character, that's not out of malicious intent. It's just like you said, he's exercising his cultural right, and he's just doing what he feels is right. So. And
speaking of the fact that in the comic books he's this villain called Man-Ape, I really liked how they got rid of some of the ridiculous parts of that.
Yeah,
and the nonsense parts of that.
Yeah,
but then they incorporated it into I liked how. Their symbol was this giant gorilla mask.
Yeah.
And I thought they took it in a more subtle way that made it work for adding this, that you understood that this, specific tribe of Wakandans was a very different kind of group of people from the other ones, and you had all these different divisions of Wakandans. Yeah. And I think it helped make them stand out.
Steering us back on track onto things I didn't like. There's one thing.
Because we keep talking about the things we do like.
It's very hard.
It was a good movie.
Yes. Good movie. But one thing that's very specific, and it was pretty much just in one scene, it felt like a very Spider-Man 2, Spider-Man 3 thing. Fighting while falling down.
When I saw that, my first thought was Spider-Man 3.
It's very small, and it's a very small chunk of that fight scene, but just for that little bit, I'm
I totally agree. I hadn't really realized, but like looking back now, I do remember being in the theater and being like, "Come
That's
on."
Spider-Man 3.
I mean, like, it was there, and then it came and went very fast.
Yeah.
The pacing of it was fine. It was just a small little snippet of an overall fantastic fight scene. But you're like, just for that little moment, I was like, come on, this again? Oh, we left this in 2007.
One more negative that I had about the film, and I haven't really heard people talking about this, so I'm going to assume that it's a positive for most people. I was not a huge fan of the whole kinetic energy thing about how his suit would absorb the energy and then he could use it. I just thought it kind of got into the territory of Spider-Man Homecoming, where his suit got a little too powerful, and it kind of like all right, now Spider-Man's this all-powerful Iron Man Jr. kid, which that I think in principle it worked okay. There was just a couple points where it went a little too far, and then same with Black Panther. I think for the most part it was fine, but there were a couple parts where I was like, all right, no one can actually stop this guy because his suit is bulletproof. And anytime anyone hits him, he can just make everyone explode.
I feel like I didn't enjoy it so much as I just didn't have a problem with it. Vibranium in itself, I feel, is one of those things that you introduce in a story because it is that powerful. Yeah. I think that's kind of the purpose of it. I can agree that at some points that can make him a bit too powerful, but it's not like it completely absorbs the impact, so like nothing harms him. He was able to get tossed around and beaten up while wearing it. I mean, I can totally see where you're coming from, but that was just kind of a neutral thing for me. I saw it and was like, okay, that's pretty cool, but it wasn't something I was like in love with.
I think it sort of added to when it didn't work because of the ring. I think it may have sort of added to that because it's basically like, here, he has this new toy. No one's been able to stop it. So you're just expecting him to use it all the time. And then it's just that one moment where you're just kind of like stopped. Like, oh, wait, it didn't work? Oh, now I'm interested. I thought that was a cool part that I liked. And overall, it wasn't like really used in any like important situations. Like it wasn't, I think if it was used like in the Killmonger fight, it could have like taken away from that, but it was just used to blast away some extras.
And it wasn't a huge deal for me. I wasn't like sitting there like, are you kidding me? Kinetic energy? No!
Not
my comic books.
No, my Black Panther. I wasn't freaking out over it. But it was something I was like sitting there and there were a couple points I was like, all right, he's a little too powerful. Like, he's a little too invincible.
He could have just used his claws. I mean, that wasn't really necessary.
For me, it wasn't so much that, like, he was too powerful or, you know, Deus Ex Machina, any kind of thing like that. It was more just, like, when it got introduced, it kind of felt like a video game. Like, more than I would have liked. Like, it was like, all right, now, when you get hit by things, make sure that you notice the purple energy on your suit. And when the purple energy fills up, use the super attack by holding both right and left trigger.
This ability
is on a 6-second cooldown.
And it just felt a little bit, especially just that scene, like, the attack itself was a little bit video game, but the scene, too, was just like, make sure that you use the kinetic energy to get yourself out of tough situations.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, end of the day, I didn't have a huge issue with it, but I can see why people might have some gripes with it.
And very similar to my thought on the Spider-Man Homecoming suit, most part I liked it. Couple points where I was like, all right, that's just a little too powerful.
Yeah.
But, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
It looked really cool, though. I really liked the whole suit design, everything about...
Oh, yeah, no, all, like, the production design, the costume design, all of it was, like, really well done.
Yeah.
I gotta say, I think I prefer the visuals of the suit for Civil War a bit more.
Yeah, I would agree.
For Civil War, it felt more personal. It felt more like this is Black Panther, whereas the second suit used in the movie, I think, well, absolutely being well designed, and I liked it a lot. I just think Civil War's suit for him is a bit stronger. I like the patterns into it, the way it looks more woven in a sense. It gives a nice texture to it. But that was another thing I really enjoyed about the movie was the way that all these different cultures and all these different things had the look, the physical costume design was fantastic. I really liked it a lot.
Just the whole design of Wakanda itself.
Yeah, and one of the things that really stood out to me was the costumes for, central main city Wakanda and moving to M'Baku's tribe. I can't remember the name of the tribe, but the more barren feel of it, the more, I guess more tribal, more primitive in a way. It felt like a civilization that had advanced from a lot more of the, African influence and mountain influence, and took less Western influence, and that really showed.
Well, they did have that part of the movie where they said that none of the previous kings had ever come down to their neck of the woods in like centuries or whatever.
Oh, that's
so,
right, yeah.
So I think it kind of adds, like, they kind of feel like they're an offshoot of Wakanda.
Definitely.
They're not necessarily fully integrated into this very futuristic,
like mainstream Wakanda.
Yeah. The word you were using before.
Afrofuturism.
Afrofuturism.
Term.
It felt like a little bit less Afrofuturistic and at least a different way.
M'Baku's tribe specifically?
Yeah.
Yes, I would agree with
that. And I love the design of it, though. Like,
yes.
that whole room, it was a little bit, like, I loved the way that it looked from the outside with the huge gorilla, like, holding it. Yeah. But at the same time, I was like, oh, that's going to fall. But I loved inside it, too, especially the room. It was very long and had those logs lining the walls. That was, I don't know.
Yeah. Everything was just very beautifully, like, crafted and created and designed.
And it just looks good, man.
One of the things, I had a very, very limited perspective on Black Panther before, but I had seen, panels from comics. And my understanding of Black Panther from that had been a little bit more, had a more mystique and more, more of a Batman quality with,
mysterious and ambiguous.
And I felt like... Huh?
Stealthy?
Yeah, like stealthy and generally darker and hides in the shadows a little bit more, kind of a thing. And I appreciate that the film had a couple scenes to add that characteristic into it.
In the woods.
In the woods at the very beginning.
I liked that.
And the car chase in South Korea. That felt very much like the aspect of his character that I had known before and missed in the movie a little bit. So I was glad to see those.
And one thing I liked, and this is just a particular, the scene with, after Killmonger has been stabbed and he's about to die, and he tells T'Challa that his father told him that Wakandan sunsets, the most beautiful thing, or sunrises, I forget which one, but are the most beautiful thing he's ever seen. I really like that. I like how that pans back to that wide shot of the physical sunrise, and like even that I knew that was like, oh, it's not so much a plot device, but it's just this piece of driven story. It still looked phenomenal.
Yeah.
And it physically took my breath away, as well as, being used to comfort this character. This movie looks really good.
On that note, we might as well just gush about all the cool shit. Because, there's so much we could pick apart and say oh, this is very well done and this is not so very well done. But there's just a lot of really cool shit in this movie.
It's just a good movie.
It is.
Come on.
It is.
Ugh.
You can. It's not perfect.
No.
You can pick apart things, but you sit down and it's a good movie.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely.
Like I said before, I really, really like the waterfall fight scenes. I think those are some of the strongest scenes in the movie. I like how visceral and brutal they are, but also almost elegant in a way that it means something more for the culture. I really liked how the movie, like we said, was diverse in the way that it's a Marvel movie very much, so you can tell, but it also separates itself. It's got its own feel. One thing I read, I forget where exactly I read it, but it felt like an MCU James Bond movie in some aspects, and I enjoyed that a lot. Yeah. I feel like that's kind of a way. I think specifically in the bits in South Korea.
Yeah, I think definitely with the scene with Shuri.
Yes, but I think I heard somewhere that she's kind of his Q, whatever. But I forget where exactly I heard that. But I really enjoyed that. I think it's a different feel for a Marvel movie than we've gotten before. It adds this really interesting dynamic where it challenges that stereotype of Western civilizations, African civilizations not being as advanced, but you have this, in essence, James Bond character with this huge technology and this big personality, and he is royalty, and he carries himself in that very important way. And yeah, I like this movie a lot. I could keep going.
So transitioning into like final thoughts, very well said. Do you have like a final grade you would give this movie out of 5?
Out of 5? Can you do decimal points?
Sure.
I might even give this like a 4.5. I liked it that much. Like, it's in my top 5 Marvel movies. I don't know where exactly, but this movie was different enough for it to like win a place up there, and just everything about the movie, for the way it impacted our culture in the real world, that the meaning it had for people, the physical movie itself just being a good movie, like I'd put it at probably like a 4.5 out of 5.
Matt, what are your final thoughts?
Very good. 4.9. There's always room for improvement. Yeah. Nothing's perfect, guys. Let's be real here. No, but overall, I really did love the movie, and I think I really got a lot. Personally, I think I really got a lot out of it, and much more. I think one of my favorite things was it was all about the culture, but you really cared about the culture. Yeah. And it wasn't just like, oh, this is how these guys do things. Yeah. Like when the guy's like, I challenge you, you're like, oh shit, that's real. And then, like, when they're like, this juice will take away the power of the Black Panther, you're like, oh.
Yeah.
Well,
and that's something that this movie did really well, which I don't think the Thor movies did nearly as well capturing Asgard. And that I feel like when we watch Black Panther, we get a really great sense of not just, oh, this is what Wakanda looks like, but this is what it feels like. This is the inner workings of Wakanda. This is how its economy works. This is how like its civilization works, and this is how it functions.
Like for me, it's very much more believable that people live in Wakanda than in Asgard.
Yeah,
in Asgard, it's always
a very nice looking place.
Yeah, it's always those wide shots of Asgard with the huge towering spires. And you're like, I don't get day-to-day life here, but in Wakanda I got much more of a feel for that, and I enjoyed it. So yeah.
I have like a lot of trouble ranking this movie because I did really enjoy it, and I tend to rank movies on how artful they are, how much they impact me, and so in that regard I would give it somewhere 3.3, something like that. Where entertainment-wise, this was a 4.5 to a 5. It was a very entertaining film. It engaged me through and through. I felt like this was the best Marvel movie I've seen. I would definitely say that. So I'd say if I averaged out my ranking of the movie, it would end up being probably a 3.5 to a 4, 3.7, something like that. Yeah.
And just my final thoughts. I really enjoyed the movie. Like I said, I wouldn't put it as top 5. In no particular order, in that top 5, I would have the first Avengers, Captain America Winter Soldier, Civil War, Guardians of the Galaxy, and the first Iron Man. So Black Panther maybe number 6, maybe number 7. It's definitely in the top 10 of mine, but not the top 5. I thought it did a lot of things really well. Like I said, I really applaud their focus on narrative and character over action and comedy. And even the action we do get is very well done. All the performances are fantastic. Chadwick Boseman is great as T'Challa. Michael B. Jordan is great. Just great direction by Ryan Coogler. That's something we didn't really get to talk about, was just Ryan Coogler, who is this incredibly talented rising director in the industry right now, with Fruitvale Station, Creed, and now Black Panther under his belt. He's really proving to be a force to be reckoned with. I mean, I do have some problems with the story structure. I think that could have been improved a little bit. I do think some of the weaving of the comedy could have felt a little more organic. There's a little nitpicky things here and there, but overall, I thought this was a really great film. And when you were starting to talk about this, when you look on the effect that this movie is having in our real life, I've been reading these stories about people, going to this movie and just breaking down crying. I was reading about this black kid who was saying, I feel like I can be a superhero because I finally see someone who looks like me on screen.
Yeah.
Seeing people who never thought that they would see a giant comic book movie of this scale, or not even just comic book movie, but a movie of this scale, having nearly all black cast, all black director, all black writers, and it's not a gimmick in any way. It feels, this is just something that our society needed right now, and the amount of love being poured out for this, and I'm honestly like getting goosebumps just like talking about this, because there's just such like it's so visceral, the reaction to this. It feels real, and in this society where we have like a lot of divisiveness, and this is just something that people are all coming together and rallying behind, and there's something really special about that, and there's something that really makes this film special. So, I mean, if I had to give it a rating on how special it is, I give it 5 out of 5. If I had to rate the film itself, I'd give it a 4.0 out of 5. I really like this movie a lot. So, alright, and that's going to do it for our spoiler discussion of Black Panther. Thank you for watching. If you would like to read a spoiler-free review, I don't know why you would need to, because we just spoiled the entire movie.
It's a bit too late for that, but...
Go check out themovieparadise.com, which of course this YouTube channel and this video is an offshoot of. There you'll find movie news, reviews, editorials, anything you would want as a movie fan. Go check that out. I'd like to thank my panel once again for being here. Nick.
Thanks.
And Connor.
Thank you.
And Matt.
Pleasure to be here.
And once again, I am Nathanael Molnár, and thank you for watching this video. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.